As the artist and writer Edmond de Waal has said, with languages, you are at home anywhere. Welcome to my discussion on multilingualism in global Englishes. I am Leomar A. Mabanag, your discussant this afternoon.
Imagine that you are enjoying your stay in southern Finland on a sunny day in June and drop by at a spacious pottery shop. Looking to your left, you happen to find your South Korean friend who you last met more than a year ago in southeastern Finland. You joke by saying that you feel exhilarated as if you were drinking cafe corrietto or an Italian for espresso. As a curious person, she wonders whether there is a difference between this and Spanish carajillo, and yet you don't know what is the exact answer. You may have assumed that the above conversation was done through English, and that is right. English was actually the main medium of communication. At the same time, multilingual influences and practices are features of their interaction, as duly foregrounded by Jenkins in 2015 with the notion of English as a multilingua franca or EMF. As seen later, we can always find multilingualism in global communications to a varying degree. Thus, it is important that we explore the notions of multilingual resources and repertoires and the role of English within multilingualism. To understand further multilingualism in global Englishes, let us take a look at these examples. After a long cycling, we had a superb dinner. You know, hunger is the best spice. We've developed a completely new design. I'll show it to you in a minute, since one look is worth 100 words. Our company is always doing very well and going to acquire a large bank. It's like adding wings to a tiger. Even without much contextual information, each of the above examples may well have triggered some plausible meaning in your interpretation. Instead of the first two, you probably find the following equivalents in English dictionaries. Hunger is the best sauce, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, or similar to the proverb, seeing is believing. First, hunger is the best spice is commonly found in at least two languages, Finnish and Swedish. As may be obvious, the sauce and spice metaphors express how good food tastes when you are hungry. A picture is worth 1,000 words, or seeing is believing, argues how convincing visual information is in comparison with verbal description.
As we can see from these examples, English language can exist with other languages, although there are differences from varying culture. English as a multilingua franca. ELF research is essentially an academic quest to comprehend global communication among English users. As with cultures, the accelerated social connection at a global scale has had an impact on how languages are used for communication. To understand a currently prominent notion in the field of ELF, example English as a multilingua franca or EMF, we will consider ELF as a linguistic phenomena and refers back to globalization, global linguistic and cultural flaws, linguistic resources and repertoires, as well as English similex. In so doing, language use is viewed as that of mobile resources across dynamic multilingual repertoire. With the increased mobility of people, technology, finance, media, ideas, and values, among others, we are actually experiencing complex web-like linguistic flaws across spatial borders. While global languages such as English are adapted and altered in these constant flaws, what accelerates these changes is multilingual contact in language use, or in the two natural loci of language. Out of the three, as already discussed, these three loci are linguistic resources and repertoires at the psychological or cognitive level, linguistic practices at the interaction level, and the last one is the linguistic constructs at the ideological level. The final focus takes on microsocial or system-oriented view towards a real-world linguistic phenomena. In brief, linguistic resources become increasingly mobile due to globalization and potentially have different indexical and referential functions. Yeah, I think that's all. I hope you have understood my discussion about multilingualism and global Englishes. Thank you so much for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be discussing about mobile multilingual resources and dynamic multilingual repertoire. So let's take a look at these two international students. Imagine that first language Hungarian and first language Japanese doctoral students communicate through English at the University of Southampton, UK. At the psychological or cognitive level, each of them has their own multilingual repertoire or the totality of individuality available among multilingual resources. So, first, we have the Hungarian. The former student learned Hungarian as his first language at home in southern Hungary, and then also English at school, like many people around the world. After studying abroad in Catalonia, Spain, with international students from Europe and South America, and obtaining a master's degree in history in his hometown, he moved to London with family and started working at an international company with locals and immigrants. He took advantage of some literacy in Spanish in the business domain and felt comfortable with diverse English, which she encountered in metropolitan areas every day. Now living in Southampton, she mixes some Japanese in social situations, especially when he sees Japanese members at a local Hungarian society. On the other hand, the student learned Japanese as his first language at home in northern Japan, and then some Italian, German, and French in relation to imported scores and books at music school while adding English in secondary education. At university, he took a French course and studied abroad at the sister college in Cambridge with a particular interest in European Union law. After obtaining a master's degree in TESOL based on the Tokyo campus of a US university, he moved to Southampton where he shares residence with students from Austria, mainland China, Hong Kong, India, and Uganda. So as such, both first language Hungarian and first language Japanese students have rich multilingual resources and their respective repertoire, but this does not mean that they possess each language separately in a full range of domains. At the same time, even though both have a good command of English and speak Japanese, their resources in these same languages are different in quantity and linguocultural quality. Moreover, English and other resources coexist within their respective repertoire for every making meaning activity, whether consciously or subconsciously. At the interactional level, these first language Hungarian and first language Japanese students regularly adapt and adjust their language use for communicative purposes. They use the Hungarian English similes and the Japanese English similes. When we say similes, it's a variety of a language spoken by people who have a different first language with features transferred from the first language in parallel by individual speakers rather than by a cohesive group. So Maurinan called this as second-order language contact. In reality, however, these first languages are not the only linguistic resources activated for meaning negotiation. The Hungarian student's language use is drawing variably on his multilingual resources from phonology to discourse, even it appears English on the surface. This English use in turn is accommodating to and accommodated by the Japanese students' English use, which is similarly drawing on individual multilingual resources. In the first place, they have developed their own English through such multilingual communication in their lives. As time goes by and the better the two students know one another, the less amount of linguistic accommodation becomes necessary to achieve mutual understanding. So incidentally, they increase their multilingual resource pool, whose lexical items are not necessarily categorizable into a particular language. So for example, they occasionally use the word competing, Japanese word gambaru, and takes the form of ing to make it more conspicuous and English-like. The original Japanese word usually means keep working hard, and they use gambating in this sense. They find this word to be friendly as well as funny, all the more so because the similar sounding word kambuling means quite the opposite according to the Hungarian's British colleague. So, globalization. It entails global linguistic flows, as with the above example of the two international students. These flows lead to unpredictable encounters with linguistic resources at a global scale. The fact that we each have a myriad of opportunities to deal with language and communication throughout our lives adds complexity to the linguistic flows. Even on a single day, you might, for example, study classic literature in a library, browse and keep up with an online newscast, and socialize at an international nightclub. In sum, due to globalization, the linguistic resources we use and encounter became increasingly associable with multiple languages, rendering many individuals' repertoire variably multilingual. Put differently, it is more common that mobile linguistic resources are multilingual and that individuals' linguistic repertoire are dynamically multilingual too. Despite this reality, however, at the ideological level, languages are neatly separated into named categories, example English, Japanese, normally at the national level and very often in association with national cultures and speech communities. Here, languages are assumed to be bounded systems, but as ideological entities, we cannot describe and delineate any of them to a full extent. As schematized in Figure 8.1, we face tremendous meetings or tensions between fixity at the ideological level and fluidity at the cognitive and interactional levels. The constructed ideology of national languages as fixed systematic objects remain powerful whenever we learn language and communicate. Even so, individual language development and use for global communication exploit linguistic resources as employed music process as with the above international student. Together with cultural flows, language does flow through social networks and mobility. And again, to borrow Pinnicock's words, caught between fluidity and fixity, then cultural and linguistic forms are always in a state of flux, always changing, always part of a process of their fashioning of identity. So, for the conclusion, our world has already experienced roughly one generation of increased global mobility and associated with linguistic flows, mainly thanks to the advent of digital communication. Our natural linguistic resources are easily mobilized across communicative contexts, and our repertoire does not necessarily fit with particular speech communities or even communities of practice. Fundamentally, we are able to practice language beyond the membership of any preset communities. The link between language and culture is an important one and highly relevant for a language-based classroom. As such, our respect for the student's first language or their variety of English equates to respect for their culture. So, that ends my discussion for today, and thank you very much for listening. God bless.
Hello everyone! Welcome to the last topic on multilingualism in global Englishes. And today, we're going to explore more on about multilingualism in English as a multilingua franca. I am Abigail L. Ramirez, and I am your rapporteur for today. We live in a multilingual world. English serves as the lingua franca for education, trade, and employment, and is essential skill for anyone wanting to succeed professionally or academically in the 21st century. In today's realities, multilingualism are diverse. In many places, there is a strong desire to see multilingual identity as a symbol of global strength, something which any country should be proud of. In a research study, for example, in Utrecht, in Netherlands, presents itself as a multilingual hotspot where individuals speak more languages than anyone else in Europe. And the administration of the city presents this as a positive thing and a sign of a better way of life. Multilingualism is not just a characteristic of an individual, but is also a characteristic of societies. Let us ponder on the following statements from Jennifer Jenkins and Anna Maranin concerning how English might develop in the future and its place in a linguistically diverse multilingual world. Have you read the statements? Now let me ask you these questions. Do you agree that English use will be increasingly multilingual in the future? Do you think, as Maranin suggests, that future generations will also become more multilingual in their use of English? If you agree that English use will become more multilingual, what do you think the implications might be for understanding and teaching English? Now, let us try to unlock the answers from the questions as we go along with our discussion. For speakers across the globe, English is, by its nature, a language of multilingualism and multilinguals. English has established itself alongside other languages in many speech communities around the world. Similar to Zeno's view of multilingualism, the working definition of English as multilingua franca scenario is multilingual communication in which English is available as a contact language of choice, but it is not necessarily chosen. In other words, the main target of EFL is the communicative use or function of language in global encounters between English users. Global communication among English users is indeed multilingual. Why? Because many English users have rich multilingual resources in their repertoire with English as their added language. English as a multilingua franca refers to multilingual communicative settings in which English is known to everyone present and is therefore always potentially in the mix regardless of whether or not and how much it is actually used. Monolingualism in English is not the norm nowadays, and that multilingualism in English is the one single factor without which there would be no English as lingua franca. There is what we called emergent multilingual influences and multilingual practices across linguistic levels. Multilingualism becomes now the new norm in ELF use. According to Jennifer Jenkins, she stated that native English speakers are seen as disadvantaged in ELF communication once we start to think of English as a multilingua franca. To simply put, let us have this example from a research study conducted by Andy Kirkpatrick in his multilingual model of ELT. He identified one implication of adopting what he called a multilingual model with the major aim of learning English is to use it as a lingua franca in a multilingual setting is that the successful multilingual user of English not only offers a role model for students but also provides the linguistic model. That is to say that multilingual English teachers replace native English teachers as the source of linguistic norms for the students. The regional multilingual English teacher provides a more appropriate linguistic model than the native English teacher. English as multilingua franca theory addresses that the best solution for mutual understanding need not be the most standardized like or native like or even English. We may observe non-English resources are also comprehensively used among English users. Now, let us know the differences between overt and covert multilingual resources. So what is this overt multilingual resources? Overt resources include expressions of multilingualism that are obviously recognized as a mixing of different linguistic resources such as code switching and translanguaging. Multilingual practices are sometimes overt. So when we say overt, it means action or attitude that is done or shown in an open and obvious way. So what I have understood here is that both speakers using English as their lingua franca still have obviously shown some influences with their first language or other languages when trying to engage in a certain conversation. So I will have an example on the next slide. Let us have this example taken from text exchanges on mobile phones between Japanese and Taiwanese students at an English medium college in Tokyo. The text was about that they are meeting up on a street, so the translation are in the brackets. Student A, Cebu no Tonane ni, so it's next to the 7-Eleven. Student B, Wazai info, Dikian niyan. I'm in front of the info or information board Ishikawa and published data. So here, we may have thought of student A as Japanese and student B as Taiwanese. However, the opposite is true that the student A is identified as a Taiwanese and student B is Japanese. So take notice of the language used by the students. It seems that they are conversing with their own first language, and as you can see, English as a lingua franca is being mixed in their conversation. Now, this is what we called multilingualism in English as a multilingua franca. The Japanese language combines three different scripts: the kanji, example Chinese characters, hiragana, literally ordinary phonograms, and katakana, literally fragmentary, but in effect it is foreign phonograms, and both info are written in katakana, line 1 makes sense as Japanese, and lines 2 and 3 are largely Chinese. So we may have thought here of in this conversation that student A as a Japanese and student B as Taiwanese. However, the opposite is true, that the student A is a Taiwanese and student B is Japanese. So again, student A is identified as a Taiwanese and student B is identified as Japanese. Similar to the EFL and multilingualism scholar Alicia Kugo's data, English-speaking interactants may use available resources from their communication partners in their first language. Here, what the Japanese and Taiwanese students engage in is clearly multilingual accommodation, with the use of the English word info, which stands as information by the Japanese student, is understandable by the other speaker. This means that the speaker of different language may speak to each other in a form of English mixed with their own first languages and will be able to negotiate their different Englishes for effective communication. Not surprisingly, the multilingual resources are often overt when participants share relatively similar languages. So if ELF is not only about English, it is important to explore in what ways it is multilingual. So what is this covert multilingual resources? Multilingualism is often more covert. Covert multilingual resources take notice of individuals' knowledge and experience that shapes their language. According to a research study of Alicia Kugo, that covert multilingual influences are of a more cognitive in nature. Covert resources offer insights into how speakers make their repertoire, or what resources they bring with them, or the knowledge and experiences that shapes their language. Kugo and Dewey in 2012 explored some examples of covert resources. Among these is the use of idiomatic expressions translated from their own first language or other language in their repertoire into English and explain their meaning. For instance, the expression stepping on stones is a literal translation from a Japanese idiomatic expression, which is used to warn someone to be attentive, not to lower their guard, because this may cause one to step on stones and fall. So, in stepping on stones example, the Japanese participant who translated the idiom only used the English wording and not the Japanese original, but she engaged in a negotiation of the covert multilingual resource, which otherwise would not have been understood by the speakers. Covert resources are processes of translation or better transformation in which the language used are not necessarily the result of direct translation from one language to another and can transform into something different and new. Multilingualism is observable to varying degrees, and the notion of English as a multilingual franca invites us to look at inherent multilingualism among English users, for most of whom English is an additional language. As a reflection to this discussion, I must say that multilingualism in English is essential in an increasingly interconnected world. Global communication through English is multilingualism as developing for each communicative scenario because individuals may have different fluencies in the languages of their region and use different languages in different aspects of their lives. People who speak more than a language have been more skillful at language learning compared to monolinguals. And that's all for my topic, and thank you for listening.